What if events went differently in Spider-Man Homecoming? What if Spider-Man became a murderer in Spider-Man Homecoming? What if Peter Parker had taken a different path? Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, to yet another Marvel's What If episode. And in today's episode, I can't wait to dive into this. One of my first ever Marvel's What Ifs was what if Spider-Man became a murderer, and that happened in Spider-Man 2002. Then I did it again in The Amazing Spider-Man, and to finally complete the saga, we're doing it in the MCU timeline with Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Now, I do want to say thank you all so very much for the latest support that you guys have shown to me on this channel. It has been a little bit tough on the channel. We've been trying our best to keep up with all of the content and posting as much as we can to provide more and more. And I do want to say, if you guys would like to support the channel further, I would highly recommend that you check out the Patreon. It's starting at just $10 a month, but the Patreon will be going back to $1 a month. We're going to be having different tiers, and I can't wait to update the Patreon. Again, that will be coming soon. But that being said, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, let's dive into the brand new episode. Location, Staten Island Ferry. Time, sometime in the afternoon. The moment was incredibly frantic for Peter. He was panting for his dear life. He was sweating from every inch of his skin. It was funny when people thought or spoke about Spider-Man and how he was saving the city. They never seemed to wonder about the hygiene of the suit. Things like how often it was washed, how it smelled when he was swinging by you, or whether or not it had been ironed. Peter chuckled to himself, and that shook it off. Humor was one of the ways he could get by the darkness of his job. At that moment, it was indeed quite dark, both literally and frantically. The lives of people were on the line. He tried to use such humorous thoughts to quieten his mind so that he could think. He brought his hand over his face and squeezed his eyes shut. Chaos ensued all around him. People were screaming, shouting, swearing. Some even called out to him. He was supposed to be a superhero, but he felt like he was failing at it again. He crouched down repeatedly, asking himself what he should do. He had already tried to sew the ferry back together with his webs. He perched on alternate ends of the broken ferry, shooting out webs, calculating his plan and praying not to be a huge disappointment. It seemed to have worked initially, and his spirit soared. The people applaud, but by and by it failed. Peter sprung to his feet. He clenched his jaw in determination not to let everyone die. He was cut out of the job, and this was a golden chance to prove it to Stark, but more importantly, to himself. He surveyed the situation again, and he found, to his utter shock, that the two parts of the divided ferry had drifted farther apart and had started tilting dangerously towards the water. This meant that they were about to sink. Peter lunged forward with hot tears stinging his eyes and shot webs out of his hands. He pulled with all of his might. He grunted and clenched his teeth, squeezing his eyes shut with his face turned to the heavens, as though he was begging for help. As if he was making a petition for the lives of the people on board, he could feel the strain on his joints. The two parts of the ferry steadily continued to sink. People let out grunting screams. Some let out prayers. Some cursed at Spider-Man to do something. He was already doing the best that he could. He was operating at capacity, and there was nothing more he could do. Suddenly, the web snapped, and immediately, both sides of the ferry toppled over. Due to the suddenness with which the web snapped, Peter himself dropped into the water as well. He was wailing uncontrollably at this point. He swarmed from left to right, flapping like a fish. Was he to rescue the mother or the child first? Was he to start the first half or the second half? He was disoriented, but even more so, he was heartbroken. He felt like he did not deserve to be alive. So he pointlessly remained in the water. Iron Man arrived at the scene in his suit. He surveyed from his vantage point above. All that could be seen from miles ahead was wreckage. Some bodies were floating on the water. It was too much to look at. He quickly located Peter. When his eyes fell on him, he noticed that Peter was still alive, in the water. He was not doing anything, just staying afloat and staring into the far distance. He continued observing him for a while longer. He understood where the boy was coming from still. His impatience had brought them to where they were at that moment. Peter should never have messed with Vulture, that too, on his own. He was going to make that clear to him. He descended and drew closer to Peter. Once Peter noticed Iron Man, he made to explain himself and the entire situation. He wanted to explain how urgent it was, and how there was no time to waste. He was going to explain how he would have saved everyone on board had the ship not been split into half, but Iron Man beat him to it. Tony drew in a deep breath and closed his eyes, because he knew Peter was not going to like what he had to say, but it had to be said. When Tony opened his eyes and started talking, his words came out with precision. He informed Peter that he was completely wrong for trying to take on Vulture alone, and there was no justification for it. Peter's face registered hurt, and he tried to explain to himself, but Tony did not let him. Tony cut in and continued his beratement of Peter and grew bolder with it. He put it on to Peter that all the people who lost their lives died needlessly and would never see the light of a new day, solely due to Peter's childness. That was enough to trigger Peter's temper. He shot up out of the water and dealt a lethal blow to Tony's suit. Several more followed with angry kicks, like a child throwing a tantrum. The only difference was that his kicks may have been childish, but they were far from it. He drew the suit in with his web and rammed it against some wreckage. Determined not to further hear a single negative word from Tony or his suit, Peter resolved to destroy the suit entirely. He had already done some considerable damage to the suit, but before he could execute his master plan, Tony managed to free himself from Peter's wrath, and he would live to fight for another day. As Peter watched Iron Man escape his wrath, he did not bother going after him. At that moment, it did cross his mind why Iron Man needed to get away that quickly. He wondered if Tony himself was potentially in the suit. He had not had it in his mind to attack Tony himself, but once the thought took root into his mind, it oddly pleased his senses. He suddenly regretted letting that suit get away. Sometime later, Peter found himself at a turning point he had never imagined he would get to. Just the previous night, he would have given an arm and a leg to become an Avenger. But at that moment, his desire had changed. He held his Spider-Man suit up in one hand. He inspected it thoroughly and looked at it, as if he was trying to mesmerize it, or itch into its memory. Then he lifted the spray can that was in his other hand, and began what he had set out to do. A streak of black paint covered the Spider-Man suit. That first streak was a massive moment, and it signaled that there was going to be a change and that it had begun. Then Peter sprayed and revamped the entire suit till it was mostly black with a touch of red. He was not the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man anymore. He was going to prove himself another way, but he could not guarantee that he would still be liked by the time he was done. Location: Peter's homecoming dance. Time: sometime in the evening. Once Liz stepped out of the car, leaving Vulture and Peter behind, the real fun began. Vulture took a long look at Peter through the rear view mirror. Peter managed his gaze. Nobody spoke for a few minutes. When it was time to break the silence, Peter spoke first. He wanted to verify whether or not Vulture knew his secret, so he took the liberty of simply asking him, as though that sort of question was like a regular gossip. When he asked the question, something flashed in Vulture's eyes. It was recognition. He realized that he was no innocent child. He was a straight shooter. Peter, on the other hand, noticed the look of recognition, but he was not satisfied. Peter flexed the taunt string in his hand. It had already been in his pocket since the car ride started, but the only thing that brought it out once Liz had stepped down. He was waiting for the right moment to use it. Vulture decided to be equally forward. He demanded that Peter find a way to cut off his relationship with his daughter. He had tried his best to keep her far away from that kind of life Peter led. He could not bear to see her walk into it right under his nose. Peter responded by saying that he would not see it happen. When Vulture looked at him through the rearview mirror in confusion, Peter quickly grabbed Vulture's neck with the string and pulled to strangle him. Vulture struggled and flapped his arms around and pressed his arms against the car, trying to honk. Peter panicked and stretched forward to take Vulture's hands off and quickly dragged him down so that they could not be seen. He tightened his grip and slowly the struggle ceased. When the deed was done, he scoffed at the body and at what had become of the great Vulture. Location: Peter's homecoming dance. Time: later on in the evening. Peter went over to Liz, who seemed to have grown antsy, waiting for him. He tapped her gently at the back to catch her attention. Startled, she whirled around quickly. When her eyes met Peter's, they registered relief, and then offense. She pushed Peter away lightly and turned back around, but she did not take a single step away. Peter could hear what she was not saying. He gently placed his hands on both of her shoulders and turned her back around. She did not meet his eyes. He held his ears as if to apologize, and she finally caved in and smiled. As they danced, Liz leaned her head on his shoulder in bliss, and Peter knew that her happiness would be short-lived, as she was about to be plunged into sorrow over the death of her father, which would be narrated to her at a ghastly car incident. At least she would have a shoulder to cry on. Location: Stark Industries. Peter loomed ominously outside Stark Industries. His mind wandered, the expanse of possibilities that could have been and would have been if Vulture had not been permanently erased from the picture. Peter had gotten a whiff of Vulture's plan to attack Stark Industries. His murderer Vulture had eliminated Vulture from the picture and had inadvertently preserved Stark Industries. But Peter was neither a savior nor did he want to be one. He patrolled the surroundings as he let his mind continue to wander. If Stark Industries was a viable target for Vulture, then it would be a good enough target for Peter as well. Plus, if some event or occurrence was to take place in Stark Industries on Peter's account, then it would send a clear message to Tony and perhaps the rest of the Avengers. They would know that they missed out on an alliance with him, because what Vulture had left incomplete, he would make sure to execute one day, or the other. But it would happen. He would make sure of that. And that is going to be, what if Peter Parker became a murderer in Spider-Man Homecoming? Imagine if events had unfolded differently. Now, this is going to be part 1. If you guys would like to see a part 2, do let us know in the comments down below. And I want to give a massive thank you for everybody who requested this incredible Marvel's What If episode. I really enjoyed doing this one, and I really enjoyed doing that other one with What If Spider-Man joined Vulture in Homecoming. That was another one that was really interesting. I love doing these Homecoming what ifs. It's very interesting. I've seen other ones with the Washington Monument, and I thought of doing it there, but I thought the ferry incident, having it be at the ferry, would have been really distraught. I mean, everybody could have died, and I think to have that be on Peter, the blame. Originally, I was going to have Peter murder Iron Man at the beginning, but then I was like, you know, we're gonna keep it going a little bit longer. Maybe there's possibility for a redemption arc. But again, time will tell. How would you like to see the story play out? Do let me know in the comments down below. And if you guys are new to the channel, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have an amazing day. Peace out.